Good morning and welcome to the Effective Software webinar on safety engagement, growing safety engagement in your workplace. Thank you all for tuning in and for joining us this morning. We are going to be running probably for the next 45 minutes or so. So yeah, tune in and hopefully we get some nice questions and points to go through over the next 45 minutes. As we go through, if there are any questions, if there's anything you want to ask, please do that as we go through. There's a questions button on the webinar there that you're able to click, and Laura, who's working on our side here, will curate all of that and feed questions throughout the conversation or towards the end. So I will start off and I'll just do some brief introductions. So I'd like to welcome the panel today. So we have Bridget Leakey, a regular attendee to our webinar. So thank you, Bridget, for joining us this morning. Bridget is the owner at The Safer Choice, freelance health and safety consultant, provides risk management support in a lot of areas, wrote a lot of articles, both for us and for journals around in quite a few publications. So good morning and welcome, Bridget.
Good morning.
And we have Kevin Hart. So Kevin is the development director at Ryder Marsh, AID, OCAD Limited. Kevin has recently published an organizational integrated improvement model based on leadership, engagement, and well-being. I know Kevin deals with a lot of very large organizations, helping them drive safety engagement and helping them to improve culture and do what they need to do. And he's going to be talking to us about that today as well. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everybody.
And then myself, Dara, so I'm the CEO here at Effective, and I'll be helping out and going through the conversation with you guys this morning. Okay, so I suppose look, maybe a brief introduction or sort of setting of the conversation as to why we're talking about engagement this morning. So for us at Effective, engagement is one of the key principles and probably the bedrock on which a good safety management system is built. From our time over the last 12 years, dealing with companies and customers and trying to help them implement management systems from a software perspective, we've always seen that when it's isolated or insulated to small groups where we don't drive out that engagement to everybody or as many people as we can within the organization, when the systems that we put in place are limited in terms of how far and how deep into an organization to reach, it doesn't work as well. And it's obvious when we say it out loud, but getting everybody on board and getting everybody engaged in safety not only makes the data, the information, the operations, and everything else that you're doing around that sort of management system better, it has a massive impact on culture, I think, as well, and that's something that we've seen. So, from the people understanding and believing that the company is committed to them, committed to their well-being, committed to their safety, they're important things. And when we talk about company priorities, company values, we're going to talk about those a little bit later. All of that really starts to matter a whole lot to people within the organization, and it really does touch on the culture, the behavior. And so that level of engagement, driving engagement and safety can be a really key principle in so many things: productivity, profitability, all the things that the company matters and they want to talk about, but really about driving well-being of individuals. So for us, engagement, we call our platform Engage EHS. It's Engage mobile platform for a reason. We talk about social safety, so we talk about driving it in and we're talking about that a little bit later. But engagement is one of those key principles, and it's hugely important to everything we think about here. So that's why we're bringing this conversation, I suppose, to the forefront today, and why we're getting our industry experts in to talk about their perspectives on safety as well and safety engagement. So Bridget, we might start with you, and I think you've got some thoughts for us really just in terms of do's and don'ts of employee engagement and driving that engaged workforce. So some thoughts on that from you to start.
Yes, I think this word engagement is one of the sort of current vogue words, but actually it's not, in a way, the concepts behind it are nothing new, in that the 20-year-old management regulations tell us that we should provide information, instruction, supervision and training for staff, that we should provide the resources, we should provide a safe place of work, we should supply safe equipment for them to work with. And the only way of ensuring that you're doing that is to actually speak to them about, do you know what you're doing? Do you know how to do your job? Would you know what to do if this went wrong, if that went wrong? Is the PPE that we expect you to wear, is it appropriate for you? Is there something wrong with this piece of equipment that makes it difficult to use or makes it hard to use? And all of that is in regulations. I mean, actually, the original management regs were another 7 years before that, in 1992. So we're not really talking about new concepts here. We're talking about what good organisations have been doing for at least the last 2 decades, which is putting all of that in place, following the regulations from scratch, and then getting the feedback from workers to find out how it's working for them. What I still see, unfortunately, whether this is organisations I come across in the course of writing articles, or people I meet at conferences, or in some places some of the sort of client base, that they still have this sort of view that, well, as long as we get you to write a beautiful policy for us, Bridget, and we've got that policy on our intranet, then we have communicated what people need to know. We have done everything we need to do, without actually going to people, well, does this work for you? I mean, I also do work with a lot of organisations where they are very good at saying, actually, we want a new policy on whatever it is, work at height or fire. Can you go and talk to our staff and find out how that would work for them? And that's the difference you see between engaging people and not engaging people. Can you write us a policy so we've got something on paper? And can you write a policy by talking to people to find out how they do things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're very different approaches, I think, and that's it. That level of engagement is critical, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can sort of see that when you go around a workplace, because if you see a notice board where you've got the standard health and safety poster and a copy of the insurance policy and not a lot else, and then maybe some posters that are sort of several years old, you know there's not a lot of engagement going on. Whereas if you can see that there's information up there, that there's suggestion boxes, that there are maybe posters about meetings and things, you can sort of almost spell that engagement when you walk into an organisation as to whether it's happening or not, without necessarily having to sort of delve down too far. But I think the other thing you come across is that you have that information and instruction and training and so on for the standard tasks when everything's going well, but where people get unstuck is they don't know what to do when they can't find the right equipment, or when there's an emergency of some sort, and people don't always have that information, and they don't know they need to know that information. So, unless you talk to your workforce, you're not going to know what it is that they're going to need.
No, I think, yeah, that goes across every element, not just the operational side of, okay, are we talking to them and do we get feedback, around the job that they're doing so that we can follow. But it's a deep level across the entire organisation. That level of communication, collaboration, and engagement.
Yeah. I mean, as an example of that, and I've come across this in more than one organisation where I've been asked to look at the fire evacuation plans, and you look at these really detailed, plans, and they're excellent, but actually, the staff have never been trained how to use them, or that the people who have been trained how to use those evacuation plans might not be there, 24/7, and therefore in an emergency, someone else has to jump in, and that person's never actually practiced that emergency plan. So, if it came to it, you'd then blame them because, well, this procedure says you should have done this. But if you haven't actually done that full follow through of making sure that they understand it, that they can report back any problems they've got with doing that, and they can say, well, actually, I can't be in that place at that time because that's not what my job is. It's getting that feedback from people as to why the plans won't work.
Absolutely. Kevin, any thoughts in terms of, from your side, in terms of creating that environment for safety, the kind of do's and don'ts that you see?
Yeah, I think Bridget mentioned it there, but it's sort of a transition. A lot of people have heard about, let's do engagement. It seems to be the thing to do at the moment. And I think a lot of organisations are saying, right, let's go out and talk to people. Let's go and do some visible leadership. Well, I think the trick is to go out and listen to people. I think there's a massive difference because then they'll feel valued. And we talked about, have they got the right tools for the job? What's going wrong? What could be better? If you go and listen to people, you'll understand that. But I think then again, the important thing is to do something about it. Because a lot of people go out and collect near misses and this, that, and the other, but do nothing with it. They measure it. They're all these KPIs. We've got 1,000 near misses this year. Haven't we done well? Because it's more than last year. But to me, it's the actions. So it's valuing your people, valuing what they're saying by listening to them and doing something about it. that will start to create an environment of trust, of a just culture. We're not blaming people, we're trying to find out. Let's go and share this sort of stuff. So to me, it's creating that environment by going out and listening and doing something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's been proven to be the fault in when you look at a lot of accident reports, Buncefield, Port Talbot. The problems that caused those major hazard accidents were known about by the workforce. That they had been scribbling in their logbooks that there'd been problems with gauges or there'd been problems with tanks, but those scribbled notes in a notebook never got escalated, never got dealt with, never got managed. So there was this process that says, right, you have to note down any problems, but there wasn't that follow through to say, well, okay, this is what the supervisors will read those notebooks, they'll log those problems with maintenance, they'll get them fixed. There was no follow through, and asking people to keep on reporting things is no good if you don't actually show them that you're going to follow through on their reporting.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest kind of deterrents for continued engagement is once you realize you're doing something and it's not being listened to, then you're just going to stop, right? And so unless people understand that the information is going somewhere, that there's actions coming from that there's visibility to improvements from things that have been highlighted, then people just tune out. And I think it's that transparency and that full 360 that needs to be very visible in any organization.
Yeah, feedback is essential.
Sorry. I think they call it learned helplessness. Pavlov's dogs, there's just no point. And people start to hide things, and that's not a good place to be.
And that's it. And look, you can probably understand those challenges when you talk about, larger organizations. If you're stuck on, paper reporting or like I said, logging in a logbook somewhere, who sees that? How does it get tracked? Who gets notified of those things moving up along the food chain? How do they get escalated easily out of a notebook into somebody else's lap to actually become an actionable item? So they're challenges from old systems, from sort of paper-based and non-automated systems. But there's issues there that have to be dealt with. Okay, so in terms of some of those barriers, and we're touching on a few of them maybe as we talk, what are those barriers that we see right now to that level of engagement for frontline workers in safety?
Yeah, well, I think what we were illustrating here was that you do have the people at the front line. I'd rather say front line than the bottom, because it sort of sounds like some sort of feudal society if we say the bottom. But the people on the front line, the people that are doing the work, they know what works and what doesn't work, but they don't have the resources to fix it. But that there's a lot of filtering that goes on up the chain, and I think that's where a lot of the problems come in. And I've certainly seen situations where I've had to produce reports, for example, which I know are sort of the target is the board, and there's been levels of filtering going on in between, which are quite frightening. I mean, we're going to come to an example later on with the Croydon tram crash, where again there was sort of filtering of information going on. And I think I think we all see these posters around saying safety is our #1 priority, and that just doesn't really work, because in reality you can't have a single #1 priority, because if a company doesn't also make money and fulfill its underlying purposes, then it doesn't exist anymore. I think, Kevin, as well, you had some thoughts about the very use of that word priority, didn't you? Kevin?
Hopefully Kevin's with us. I know Kevin was talking about priority and values earlier when we were having a chat. Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have priorities, and actually next week there's a different priority because things have changed. And to me, it's about value. It's absolutely about safety being a value. To me, it's about caring for your people. If you care about the safety, you care about your people, the well-being comes through, as Dara said earlier. The impact on the organisation is not just safety improvement, it's about well-being, it's about productivity, quality, a lot of research that we'll talk about later. So to me, it's absolutely a value and not a priority, because priorities change.
Yeah, and I think if people can't see, people are, the danger of sort of saying, oh, we should care about each other is I mean, absolutely we should as a moral issue, but I think for some senior management, maybe the moral issue isn't in itself enough, because you can always sort of use weasel words around that. But I think the other thing that I see a lot of is in the a lot of health and safety magazines, is the number of prosecutions that there are now against directors, not as a representative of the company, but as individuals. And the number of, since we had the February 16 sentencing guidelines, the following year we had 3 times as many directors being prosecuted as the year before. I think it went from about 15 to 46, and some of those ended up in prison. And I think that's what directors have to get to grips with. And then it went up again when we had the manslaughter guidelines in 2018, that directors will go to prison if they allow people to be killed on their watch. So even if you don't value people because of a moral incentive, you don't want to end up in prison. And you don't want to end up being disqualified from being a director. You don't want to have to do 200 hours community service. You don't want large fines. So that idea of being a value, yes, there's the moral value there, but there's also a financial value to safety, that if you don't do it, it will cost you money.
No, absolutely. And I think the priority, you can probably give lip service to a priority, but values are really demonstrable. And I think that's the key thing. It's through actions, and it's through what people do from that senior management level down that will define the values of a business. So you can list your values on a wall and say, we value safety above all else, but actually if they're not demonstrating that within the business, and they commit to both financially, but also, in terms of the incentives, how you incentivize people, how you drive behavior in the business, all of those things have to be inherent in terms of how this company is managed.
I mean, it's one of those red flags for me that, the number of companies I've been in where they've said, can you have a look at our safety policy and help me rewrite it? And the number of times where it says safety is our first priority. And I've said to them, no, actually, tell me what your first priority is. What actually is this organisation here for? And that might be the organisation is actually there to provide entertainment, or the organisation is there to do research, or the organisation is there to sell a product. And it's like, yes, okay, so actually your priority is to sell your product whilst not hurting anybody. And actually, you need to word your priorities in that way, because otherwise you just, as soon as people read that, they're going to go, well, we know that's not true. We know that's just another one of those, motherhood and apple pie statements. And we have to get away from that kind of approach to just saying safety's first, because clearly it has to be balanced with other priorities or other values.
No, absolutely. Kevin, any thoughts on that?
Lots of thoughts on that, but we haven't got the time. I think we can go into invisible leadership there. A lot of people, as you say, these are our values, but people aren't stupid. They can tell if leaders really mean that or not. So I think values is a well misunderstood word, a well misused word. And again, going into boards of directors, I said, whose values are they? Are they yours as a board, or are they the people's? Because if the front line and the supervisors, managers, etc., if they don't understand the values, if they don't believe in them, then they're not worth having. So I think the values is a very powerful word, certainly in terms of engagement, because if it's everybody's values and they can buy into them, it's going to work a lot better. People will understand them and they'll live those values.
No, absolutely. And there's a Simon Sinek, he talks about starting with why. So if the board's why is different than the employee's why, and it's different to the company's why, then all of those things will be in conflict. So you do have to really align all of those elements, and like you said, they have to be the values of shared across the business and people aiming for achieving those. The company goals while adhering to those values is really hard to do. Okay, I'm looking. Maybe then we might kind of move on and just have a chat, maybe Kevin, from your side around the maybe a case study. So I know you've got an example you're going to talk us through of an engagement that you've had across a multinational organisation in terms of helping them drive engagement in the workforce.
Yeah, this is one of our global clients. Some of you might have heard of them. They make massive cranes all over the world. And they were struggling. They got to a certain point in terms of their safety culture where they were becoming compliant. They were still getting issues, still getting problems. And I think one of the things that we found is that a lot of organizations think, oh, we'll get discretionary effort. Compliance means we'll get discretionary effort. Compliance doesn't mean that at all, because again, if your people aren't engaged, they don't need to be compliant at work. They can be what they want to be. And the culture is what you set as a leader. So we went to work with this organisation, and I think there was about, I can't remember offhand, but quite a few, 23 sites around the world. And we worked with 16 or 17 of those, and we took them beyond compliance. And that meant Not more systems, not more policies, procedures, because organizations become system obsessed. They can't get beyond that level of safety culture because they're focusing on systems. So we turned it around and we focused on people. That's engaging with the people, listening to them again, collaborating with them, getting feedback from them, actioning things. And the results were staggering across not just the UK and Europe, but across the world. And to me, a lot of people think, oh, engagement works in Europe, works in the UK, but it's about people. We've got feedback from India, from China, from South America. If you engage with the people, you value people, you will start to get these fascinating results. And I think if we go to the next slide there, Dara, it gives some impact statistics, really. So the sites that did work with us, or we supported in becoming better at their safety culture, actually reduced LTIs by 78%. That was over 18 months, which again was absolutely fantastic. And I think the reason that happened is because the leaders wanted it to work and the front line wanted it to work, and the organization all the way through wanted something to happen differently. The other sites didn't want to be involved with this sort of engagement, the next steps, and they actually increased their LTIs. So they didn't apply this engagement model. They didn't look at improving their safety culture through their people. They kept putting more systems in place, more policies, procedures, rules, regulations. You cannot improve your safety culture by putting in more systems. You become system obsessed. Most of the companies we work with around the world have got to that stage. They can't get to the next level. We talk about engagement, and these are some of the results that we have, and I think fascinating. And just as a sort of onward sort of caveat on that, is that we went and asked them how their safety culture was improving, and they said it's brilliant, but also we're getting better quality, we're getting less absenteeism, presenteeism. So all these benefits of engaging with your people start to come through. And to me, that's absolutely where we need to be, engaging with people.
And I mean, look, yeah, that's, I suppose, I think, again, I've talked about this a lot, but I think everybody knows the story of Alcoa in the US as well. And the turnaround that was driven by the CEO at the time when he came in and focused on safety. There was a declining share price. It was the largest company in the world at one stage. It was a declining share price. It was dropping away. People were, a lot of injuries. There was a lot of significant fatalities. And he came in and told Wall Street he was going to, my focus is safety, and the core thing that we're going to focus on over then. This is what, 1985, I think, 1986. And over the next 3-4 years, he demonstrated that by going to the sites, getting them to know all of the workers, understanding the risks that were there, driving new incentives for improving safety, and the productivity, the output, the profitability over the next 3 years all changed drastically. So that book, The Power of Safety, I think for a lot of safety professionals, is a really strong story and a strong indication of that, and we'll back that up. And I know from our side, in modern times, if you want to call it that, and system obsessed, actually, when you talk about system obsessed, I do very much kind of align with that as well, and see where that obsession with detailing everything out to the next level and writing up new procedures and writing everything up, you need to have these things in place for 45,000 a month and for your for sort of documentation side of that. But without the right type of engagement, all of that doesn't work. You're just writing upon writing upon writing, and it's not going anywhere. And I think where we've seen that kind of support maybe from a software perspective, one of our customers, when we talk about driving engagement, one of their key elements was to try and get more leading indicators driven into the business, and to get more people involved in that from the front line all the way through. And when we put the right approach from the business, so their drive and their focus on engagement and their engagement with frontline workers with the, use of technology, they've seen a 500% increase in terms of the data coming in, quality data coming in, and similar to what you're looking at there, was a 70% reduction in their LTIs over the course of 18 months. So again, I think that level of engagement, the drive with that, is really, really something that can make a massive impact on an organization, for sure.
And I think that can even start with quite small attempts, because I think it depends on sort of who's listening to this webinar as to whether they're in a position to make that culture change from the top, or whether they're just in a position to look at the procedures that they're responsible for. And certainly even on a small scale, I mean, one particular example I had with one client some years ago, they had I think it was a 22-page document that went out to every contractor, and every contractor was supposed to read this document and sign it at the end to say that they'd read and understood it. And it was supposed to cover everything, and it started giving a lot of detail about specific aspects that they wanted contractors to comply with. But clearly, no contractor was actually reading a 22-page document, so it was pointless. We reduced it down to a 2-page form, and the staff loved it. The contractors were quite happy with it, and actually, you had them actually concentrating on the detail that mattered. So even at that sort of, even if all you are is responsible for a few forms and procedures, you can start to make that cutting down the bureaucracy, cutting down the paperwork, getting people engaged. But the really key thing about that form was that when I actually did about 7 or 8 versions of that form, because every time I did a version of it and I gave it to the staff who were using it, they'd come back to me a week later and say, oh, can we change this? Can we change that? Can we change the other? And I love the fact that they kept telling me, actually, you haven't done it right, because I couldn't do it right first time. I needed their feedback as to how the form worked to improve it. And it is, you can get that level of engagement even at that sort of small level, even if you don't have the power to change the whole organisation. You can change things at your level.
No, absolutely, and there's always a kind of either top down, bottom up, or middle out, approach, and it's finding what's right and driving that level of engagement for what you're responsible for, and hopefully that demonstrates to the powers that be or the people that are reporting into you how that works, and then it does kind of articulate itself through and drive through an organization in that way. But it does take commitment, and it does take drive, absolutely. So, okay, we might just quickly kind of think about I suppose, Bridget, I think you have some thoughts here just around the failures in engagement. So,
I feel a bit like the doomsayer in this webinar, because you and Kevin
always
have come
the
up
bad
with
news. You're always bringing the bad news first, Bridget. But the consequence of disengagement, I think, at best can be like poor productivity and no visibility. At worst, significant things happen. So, let's maybe.
I think we picked this one because it is yet another example where, had you read the runes, had you picked up on the cues that were there, 7 people wouldn't have died, 62 people wouldn't have been seriously injured. In that there had been 4 years before the tram crash. I don't know if people remember, it was in 2016, this crash, and it was the tram was going too fast around a bend. It was still going at 80 miles an hour and it should have slowed down to 20. There had been previous reports of trams speeding at that point. There'd been concerns, even the drivers had admitted to their immediate supervisors that they had this thing called loss of situational awareness, where you would imagine if you're on a long car journey that you've done several times, and you get to a roundabout and you think, oh, am I at the first roundabout or the second roundabout? And you forget for a moment where you are. And because of the nature of this route, the sort of human factors involved, people were making this mistake on several occasions. So there was plenty of evidence there that had there been a better connection between the people between the drivers and between the people who were making the decisions, the whole accident could have been avoided. One of the things that when the rail accident investigation branch were investigating, they actually asked the train drivers, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you speak to your senior management, and the scores were around about 3.5, which is kind of frightening. On a scale of 1 to 10, you only feel like about sort of third confident that you can talk to people, and we have to improve that. And if you can't improve that directly, well, then one way is to sort of shorten the chain, and technology sometimes is the way to shorten that chain, to make sure that you get that information from the people who are experiencing the problems to the people who are the decision makers and have the budget to improve things. Unfortunately, the sort of recent reports that have been coming out about TfL and in relationship to this was that actually even now they haven't necessarily learnt their lessons, and that there was a survey, an audit a few months after the crash into fatigue management in the tram operator, and the draft report and the final report were apparently quite different, in that some of the recommendations, shall we say, were toned down in the final report. So they perhaps haven't learnt their lessons on this one.
Yeah. Kevin, any thoughts there in terms of what you see from that failures in engagement, where people don't commit maybe in programs, or what happens?
Again, I think it's about the communication. Communication is key. Bridget mentioned it there. We work with a guy called Mike Appleby. He's the sort of defence lawyer in the UK, and many of the issues and areas he's covered come back to the same thing. It's about communication. Why do we have all these procedures in place stopping people actually getting information through, and how do we not take action on them? Why do we just put them in a drawer somewhere and say, yes, we've had 300 near misses, isn't that great? So it's back to communication, it's back to actioning, exactly as Bridget said.
Yeah, no, and look, I think from our side, we couldn't agree more. That's obviously where we try and come in and assist, and that's an area that we do focus on. So that kind of, how can technology help? You know, when we talk to potential customers and we talk to existing customers, we never try and come in and say, look, we're the solution to your engagement problem and we're going to fix things for you, because that's not the case and that wouldn't be true. I think, you know, where we see outstanding results is where we see the commitment from the safety teams and we see the commitment from the business to drive a more engaged workforce, and we try and provide some tools to assist with that and make those levels of communication more important or more easily addressed. And that communication element is one of the biggest challenges, I think, in safety. Sort of two-way communication, looking at data coming into the safety team so you can analyze and understand, and those leading indicators driving in, you know, at the earliest possible time, so that you can collate that information and look at emerging risk and deal with it before it causes harm, versus the lagging indicator insights of, okay, these are the things that happened, and if we assess that, what do we think is going to happen in the future? And really, you know, that level of data, and when we think about it from our side in terms of data and kind of systems management, that level of data and information isn't possible unless you're engaging everybody in the workforce to try and be the eyes and ears out there. So you talk about, you know, a team of 10 safety professionals in a company of 5,000 people or whatever it might be, you know, well, you really want 5,000 sets of eyes and ears who are helping you do your job in the best possible way. And that's, I think, from our side, where we talk about it from a technology perspective, when we drive safety in people's pockets and look at the Engage mobile platform and try and give people those tools, that's what we're trying to help with. And I think for us, that's the mission and the vision, is to try and make every single person in the organization an active part of that safety platform, so that you can get that information in real time and identify those issues before they cause harm. And I think that's, you know, something that a lot of people struggle with in industry as well, because it's difficult, you know, especially without software. It's very, very hard. You know, and I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities out there as we look to the future as well for that. So driving engagement, you know, right now mobile is probably the biggest one that we talk about, because actually, you know, when we talk about mobile adoption in software, you know, it's still very, very low. I think it's 98% of 20 to 45-year-olds have smartphones, but there's only something like a 5% of the surveys that we've done previously, and from industry reports that we've kind of collated, it's about 5% of safety teams are using mobile to actually, you know, as a key part of their safety management platform. So there's a huge gap there between what's available and what people have, and I suppose the scope there for engaging those tools and software services to what's actually been used. So there's lots of stuff we could talk about. I think we've a lot of probably more interesting things to go through, so we'll probably skip on past this, but there's so much that we will be looking at in the future in terms of IoT and information from connected devices and wearables, and how we can start to look at using augmented reality to really assist through both mobile and wearables for safety professionals. But really, it's about getting people engaged first, and then the technology, I guess, comes after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, you know, Darragh, the technology is an area I've looked at quite a lot in a few articles, and I think certainly I think it's still a long way off. I mean, I've seen people trying to use, for example, chatbots to do incident reporting by speech rather than doing it by sort of typing and selecting options. It's not there yet. I've also I've written about this as well, about using wearable technology and Internet of Things. So, for example, instead of someone having to report that, I don't know, noise levels were particularly high in the factory today, if they've got a piece of wearable technology that measures noise levels, it knows where they are because it's got some geolocation facility as well, then that data could be recorded automatically, and then health and safety manager could have a look and have a look at a sort of noise map, a heat map of what was going on. and then of course to avoid that overload of data, you then need the artificial intelligence layer to actually filter out, well, what does the person need to know, what do they not need to know about all this extra data that's being collected. So I think there are some exciting things that are going to happen in the next decade, but I think we are talking about that sort of fairly medium-term time frame. We're not talking about anything coming around the corner tomorrow. Given that I still see people trying to manage health and safety and accident reporting using Word and Excel, I don't think we're quite there yet. But there's a lot of exciting things that could happen in the future there.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think these are all things that will assist with that sort of, the software assists with the engagement. It doesn't drive it, and I think that's I think that's where probably Kevin comes in. It's the culture, it's the management team, and the safety professionals that are kind of driving out the policies into the business. That's where the culture is set. That's where the engagement has to come from. And there's lots of tools that we will provide and that we can provide to kind of help with that. So from our perspective, obviously it's hand in hand. Like the technology makes your job easier to drive that engagement, but the human level is I think.
Absolutely, and without the engagement, the technology won't work, because we saw this when they first introduced things like the so-called spy in the cab. So people who are mobile workers in vehicles were having their vehicle, the speed of their vehicle, the location of their vehicle tracked. And because a lot of that was done very badly, people felt like they were being spied on, that they were being tracked, that it was about performance management rather than about lone working and safety. So similarly, if we put trackers on workers that will tell us where they are, how long they spend in the toilet, how long they spend in the noisy area, how long they spend in an area exposed to diesel fumes, we have to really engage people as to understand why that's happening, how that can get them to tell us how that will work for them and how they would like to use the technology, because we need to get that conversation going, that if we're going to use all this newer technology, and it's going to be a change of ways of working for people, they need to know. People choose to spend several £100s on Fitbits because they want to track their fitness. And we would, if we're going to introduce technology, wearable technology into the workplace, it's going to have to be a similar process where people have to want to wear it because they know that it's going to help to keep them safe and healthy in the workplace.
There's a question that everybody asks whenever you ask them to do anything, whether they say it out loud or they don't. It's what's in it for me, right? And I think it's a question that's asked again and again and again. In internal voice, it might not be said out loud, but every time there's a change in kind of work practice, whenever there's a change in your job role, whenever there's a change in anything, it's, well, what's in it for me? Why are we doing this? And I think that comes back to that communication piece of, you need to understand the what's in it for you. We're trying to make a safer workplace. We're trying to give you better tools to do that. We're trying to reduce the friction so that you can be happier and healthier and safer in work. And so again, that comes down to that communication and engagement, I think.
Yeah, and I think going back to Kevin's point about that two-way communication, that it isn't just a case of, well, I've decided I'm going to give you a wearable technology, so I'm going to make sure you know why I'm giving you wearable technology and what the benefits for you will be. It's going to be, well, I've got this as an option. How do you feel about it? How would that work for you? Can you think of a better way of doing it? And actually get that feedback from the workforce about, because they may have a better idea about how it can be done than the idea that the technology provider has.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And Kevin, I know you're kind of passionate about the management engagement, and that's an area that you spend a lot of time in. Like, what's your take on from that side?
I have a brilliant story just following on from what you were saying earlier. Is that working with a rail company here in the UK, and they were talking about all things engagement, so they decided to spend a lot of money on their front line. It was over £1 million. They then did a quick engagement survey, because that would be good, wouldn't it, if they spent £1 million on the front line. The survey came back saying, you don't care about us. So it's back to that word again. So we sat down with them and understood why. And it was because they hadn't asked the front line what they thought. They didn't value their opinion. The front line had no input. It was just imposed upon them. So again, I think there's a massive opportunity there for organisations. Back to the what's in it for me. If there's nothing in it for the front line, they're not bothered. Why would they collaborate? Why would they engage? You don't care about us. So we sat down with the people. We did some management training. We did some emotionally intelligent training with them. And it was all about collaboration. It was about listening to the front line, letting them feel valued. And it transformed the organisation. It doesn't happen overnight. There's no silver bullet, sadly. But if you actually get your managers, your leaders understanding that actually the input, feeling valued for those frontline guys makes a massive difference, then you'll actually get engagement. If you just think you'll go and do engagement, hey, let's be nice to our people, let's spend money on them, they'll love us, it won't work. It absolutely won't work. It's back to what you said, Dara, what's in it for me? It's back to feeling valued, having some input and collaboration. And managers, leaders don't get that yet. Some of them do, and they're the companies that are succeeding. As with this slide here, on the left-hand side there, if you don't feel engaged, you don't feel valued, you're half an inch smaller, you don't feel good about it. These sort of people take 10, 12 days off a year, and lots of statistics show presenteeism is anywhere between 2 to 6 times worse than absenteeism. Presenteeism is where you're on the job, but you're not sort of focusing on it, you're away with the fairies, call it zombie time, what you will, because nobody cares about you, so why would you care about what you're doing? Massive impact on organisations. Up the other end of the scale where you are engaged, you're half an inch taller because people value you. They want to hear what you've got to say. They trust you. You've got the input into what's happening, into the team, into the organisation. You're part of those values we talked about earlier. So we're proving this with organisations again, not just in the UK and Europe, but around the world. Quality improves, resilience improves, and that's not just organisational resilience, it's personal resilience. And I'll share some research with you in a minute, but it's the impact of feeling valued is massive. It's all down to drugs. Down the left-hand side, you get cortisol, that's your stress drug. On the right-hand side, you've got oxytocin. We're working on, with the CIPD here, and Engaged for Success, and we're proving that engaged organisations improve their corporate social responsibility. People have the wherewithal, they feel good, so they're out in the community at weekends, working with charities, working with local communities. If they're down the bottom end, they haven't got the energy or the wherewithal. So again, the impact on not just the organisation, but corporate social responsibility, sustainability is massive. Of course, that impacts on your brand. Certainly millennials nowadays, they want to work with an organisation that's actually got some values out in the community. Imagine HR. Who wants to work for a company that's down the left there, where people are absent, presenteeism, nobody cares? Retention and recruitment is massive for HR organisations or HR part of the organisation. So to me, it's not just about safety that we're talking about here, it's all this other good stuff that we should be thinking about as organisations. This is why we should be caring about our people. We should have the right leadership. And that goes straight down to quality of working life, where would you rather be? Which end of the scale there? So to me, it's massive. We're proving this not just in the UK, as I said, it's global. And I think one of the latest research has come out from Gallup, said that when employees are engaged, they're thriving, agile, resilient, they take fewer unhealthy days as a result of physical or mental illness, less likely to be diagnosed with a new disease in the next year. This is research proving the impact of engagement. And I think that's exactly where organisations need to be thinking about. It's not just about your safety, it's not about your money, it's about the impact you have on the local communities, the impact you have on your people. And that's why, to me, it's absolutely the thing to be doing.
Look, it's a powerful message, and when you hear that kind of research in relation to the impact on well-being and the impact on, like, obviously the follow-on from that, that works its way down through all levels of community and family and everything else as well. So it's a huge responsibility, but there's huge benefits there, I think, to getting people engaged in the right way. You spend, 90,000 hours a year or in your lifetime working. So, if you're doing that in a state of presenteeism, it's not a nice place to be, I guess, absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organisations are looking at mental health first aid. I think the HSE over here have shown it hasn't really worked as it should. And I think, again, because people are putting the mental health first aiders in because they haven't got the engagement. People are presenteeism and absenteeism, but then they put them back into the same culture where they got stressed in the first place. Yeah. So they're missing the trick there. There's no strategic thinking in this engagement stuff. It's just knee-jerk and let's do this, let's do that. It needs to be more strategic.
Yeah, I mean, mental health first aid is one of those things, a bit like sort of yoga and free fruit. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's a little bit like wearing a hard hat or wearing safety gloves. You're not actually removing the causes of stress in the first place, and certainly any of the work-related causes of stress. you need to be tackling those. And the HSE management standards, again, are not new. They've been out there for a long time. But again, I frequently see even even government organisations themselves, or perhaps especially government organisations themselves, don't apply their own the HSE management standards for stress. So they have reorganisations without telling people what's going on, and that's one of the biggest causes of stress in any organisation. And sticking in mental health first aiders is like sort of saying, well, we'll just have the workplace as noisy as we like, and we'll make everybody wear ear defenders. And it's just not the approach. It's not applying that hierarchy. We need to apply the same hierarchy to health as we apply to safety.
Yeah, it's kind of the safety by design, where you're saying eliminating the risks. Yeah. You have to think about it, I guess, in the same way, right?
And obviously, some mental health problems are, caused by things outside of work, but on the other hand, they can be made worse by inflexible workplaces and so on. So if you can make the workplace flexible enough that people can kind of cope with those stresses that are happening outside of work, you've got a further case of being able to reduce the stress at source rather than relying on mental health first aiders to pick it up and deal with it.
Oh, absolutely, and I think we can probably put a whole other webinar together on that at some stage and come back and talk about that for round 2. But I think for today, that kind of gets us to more or less the end of our slides and more or less the end of the conversation. And it's been really insightful, I think, from both of you guys, just to bring the different perspectives and the information that you did. So thank you so much. We do have a few questions, so we might ping them back across to you before we disappear, if that's okay. So I have a couple here, maybe just to read out. A couple of points maybe from each of you, just in terms of what are your tips to starting team member engagement. So I suppose there's been a lot of information in there and hopefully some good insights for people as we've gone through it. But maybe if you were to give a couple of bullet points of, okay, I need to go back to the workforce and I'm going to look at how do I just get even my team, my small team of 5 or 10 or whatever it might be, how do I start off and really drive engagement there and work on that? So, I don't know, Kevin, do you want to start? Maybe any key pointers of where to start?
I've got 2 straight away. Go out and listen to them. Don't talk to them. Talk about a 3-legged dog. Find out who in your team has got a 3-legged dog. And when you do go out and talk about safety, talk about the 3-legged dog first, because then you'll engage with them. You'll get so much more out of a conversation if you go and actually listen to the guys, talk about what's important to them, actually really engage with them, but mean it. The second one is whatever they tell you, then action it. Don't just collect it as a number, because a lot of companies, a lot of people have safety conversations. Fantastic. So what? Then what do they do with the information? And again, that's where I think the technology comes in. A lot of people will actually put it aside. They'll collect 100 things and do it next week. It's not really relevant. So to me, go out and listen. Don't talk to them. Action something. Don't just collect the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've sort of picked up is actually sometimes a more informal approach can work. I mean, unlike Kevin. Kevin is sort of, as I understand, you're brought in at quite a high level in the organisation. I mean, I worked with one organisation where at sort of supervisor and sort of head of department level, I was being told there weren't any problems with a particular piece of equipment that they were using, that there were no hazards, there were no accidents, there'd been no incidents associated with this equipment, but it didn't smell right to me. And we had a formal meeting where the supervisors were there and the staff, the frontline staff were there, and there was like, were there any problems? No, there weren't any problems. And so I was told, look, see Bridget, you're wrong, there weren't any problems with this particular type of equipment. Later on that day, I went and sat in the mess room with the guys. So the supervisors weren't there, but the front line, the blue overalled staff with the grease on were sitting there having a cup of tea. They invited me in. They made me the most disgusting cup of tea I probably ever drunk, but I sat there and I drank it to be polite. And I admitted to something stupid that I'd done, somewhere that I'd made a mistake, and it actually involved burning my son's trainers, but that's another long story. So the context then was that rather than being in a formal meeting with their bosses there watching them and me there as the health and safety advisor, they were now chatting over a cup of tea with someone who was fallible, someone who also made mistakes. And then they said quite spontaneously, oh yeah, and I've made a mistake a bit like that with this piece of equipment, and this has happened. And then someone else said, yeah, do you know, I've done that a few times as well, and luckily I had my goggles on, or actually I did get a bit of a burn on that occasion. And suddenly there was this flood of information coming out to me, in that informal context that they wouldn't have admitted in front of their bosses. So I think if you want the frontline staff to tell you what's happening, you need to get them away from their bosses, and you need to maybe admit to some fallibilities yourself to actually get them talking about what happens.
Yeah, I think it's look, and it comes back down to a lot of principles. That's the kind of belief in a no blame culture. I'm not going to get blamed for this. I can talk about this openly, and I think listening, and there's some fantastic points. I think that will hopefully, for that listener, help with their engagement plan and talking to the team members. Okay, another one here for another question through. How do you address past failures? So frontline staff have lost a lot of belief due to past promises that weren't delivered. I'm guessing deliver, but think, like that's
and I think maybe you have to start with a small gain. I think that's certainly sort of a lot of the case studies I've seen is that where if you promise the earth and then you don't deliver, that's not much of an achievement. Whereas if you say, okay, well we'll get we'll change the plastic cups to reuse it to washable cups in the canteen, or we'll put in an extra water fountain for you. You can do that, you can deliver that. So if you can deliver one small change for people, I think you can start to win their confidence for suggesting other things. And it's certainly been my experience that sometimes it is those small things that bug people. I remember one organisation I used to work for where they changed their vending machines from cash to card, and there was an uproar. And it's sometimes it's quite small things that people want to make their life easier, more pleasant, and we need to think about giving them some small wins to start with.
Yeah, no, it's back to that. I think, Kevin, it's the action piece, isn't it? You got to listen, but you got to take action. So if you don't take the action, so any, like you said, small actions, small improvements, there's a positive contagion that can occur from that, and people see that actually something is happening, and you build off of that and build momentum. Kevin, anything else to add in on that in terms of those past failures?
Yeah, I think, again, it's back to communication. We interviewed tens of thousands of people around the world, and beliefs are hard to change. And we've asked organisations, have you got a blame culture? And the top of the tree have said, no, we've changed that. We used to have, but we've changed it. We go and talk to the front line, and they say, well, yeah, Dave got sacked for doing this, that, and the other. And we said, well, when was that? Oh, 10 years ago. But their beliefs are still there. So that communication piece isn't. So all those little things, beliefs, hard to change. That depends on your language. That will start to change things. Is it positive, negative? Are you starting to listen to people or blame people? So language is important. Your behaviours, are you actually leading by example? Are you walking the walk? And as we said, the environment, the tools, if you're giving them the right environment, the right tools, they will start to believe that you care. But it's the little wins, but they've got to be communicated. People have got to start talking about the positive and not the negative. So yes, small wins to start with. Absolutely communicate that properly so people understand what's happening. Actions.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that forms a tidal wave of I suppose improvements. Then as they start coming through, the little wins step up to something far bigger, and you get that contagion working through in a positive way. Absolutely.
Well, once they start to trust you, you'll get the engagement, and to me, it's building that trust, and that takes time once it's been lost. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, fair point. And we might be kind of coming back to the same points on this question, but we'll frame it anyway and see what people think. So in our organisation, there's been a huge problem with workers thinking that managers only care for kind of the legalities, the compliance element, even though that's not true. So yes, the government needs proof that the company is doing everything to keep workers safe, but the employees regard kind of the checklists and things that we have to do as undermining their expertise. How do you address that?
That's a really good question, and what we find a lot of the time is managers are trying to put the message out, but the message coming from the top, is it genuine? Yeah, we really do believe in safety. We're not about systems, but the message the managers are getting from the top is we need this data, so go and collect the data. So again, it's back to whether it's genuine, whether it's real leadership, and what the messages are. It's the communications again. So they might be telling the managers, we want data, so the managers have to go and get the data. So until we understand and listen to the front line, the supervisors and the leaders on what those messages are, then it's tough. It's a real tough one. And it's how they put them across, those managers, to the front line, back to what's in it for me. Why are we doing this? if it's genuine and the front line can buy into that reason, then perhaps it'll start to work. But I would love to hear the messages from the top.
I had a client recently where there was a checklist that the local manager did every month, and then I go along every 6 months and I look at their checklists and I do my own checklist. And I'm not in a position to change the checklist. I'd love to reduce the checklist, but I'm not in that position to do that. But what I was finding was that the attitude of these local managers was that they thought that what they were supposed to do was to tick everything every month. So I would go in half year after half year and see all these beautiful pages full of ticks. And I sort of sat down with them and I explained it to them that actually what I want to see when I come in is some ticks, and I want to see some crosses, and I want to see some scribbling out, and I want to see some notes. And I want you to show me what the problems are. So if there is a problem that you've got so much stock, for example, that your fire exit is often blocked, put that down on your checklist that that's the situation. Don't pretend that your fire exit is never blocked, because I can't fight for resources for you if you've always got ticks. And they were quite nervous about doing this, because they thought that if they started putting crosses rather than ticks, that they would get some sort of kickback on that. And I think what they were also delighted to find out was actually they started putting crosses in instead of ticks to show what the problems were, and nothing bad happened. And so you have to get their confidence that actually these checklists aren't here for simple legal compliance. That's not what the checklist is here for. The checklist is here. It's like a form of a risk assessment to go, what problems are you having? What problems can we help you with? How can we help you? It would be nice to have the time to kind of listen to everybody in a long conversation, but the checklists are a way of listening to people in a sort of systematic way. But it was getting their confidence that it was okay to say, I've got a problem. And to move away from that sort of compliance tick box exercise to being this tick box exercise is a way of saying where my problems are and what I need help with.
No, absolutely. And I think, there's it takes time, doesn't it? There again, it's back to the kind of trust. It's back to the building the positive culture. It's back to demonstrating that, okay, look, here's why we're doing this, and explaining why we're doing this, and showing the benefits of that over time. And there's a term in business marketing, the green banana syndrome. It takes time for these things to ripen and actually work. And I think it's very similar in kind of building that trust and kind of the engagement. It takes time, so you got to focus on those wins. You got to work through them to develop out that culture. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, there's one other question, which is just for me, just to reiterate the US case study I mentioned. It's Alcoa, ALCOA. From a book, The Power of Habit is the book, but there's an excerpt that's published separately called The Power of Safety, and it is readily available online. If anyone wants the link, they can just send through a note to Laura here, and we'll send it on to you. But it just gives a great insight into a real case study of a very large organization that was really struggling with safety and financially, and had a massive impact from really focusing for that, core values on safety, and saying, actually, we care, and the outputs from that. So anyone wants that, just know. So at that point, I think I'm going to wrap up, because we're just hitting we've gone over time a little bit, but hopefully we still have a lot of people with us. So thank you for hanging on and listening. Bridget, thank you so much it's always a pleasure. Kevin, again, thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk, and always a pleasure to get your insights on safety and on business in general. And hopefully people listening, you got a lot out of that. If there are any follow-on questions, again, don't be afraid to send them through to us, and we can pass them back to the panelists. If you want to look at how technology can help in terms of engagement, then please go onto our website, have a look at Engage, the EHS platform, or go onto our blog. There's lots of resources on there in terms of employee engagement and things like that. So thank you very much, and all have a great day. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.